Effie, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Oclas Consulting webinar. Obviously, for those of you who are not aware, Effie is someone who is very, very significant in the oil and gas industry. And we go way back to when he was in Shell, when I was doing some work in Shell. But we will get into all of that in a minute. So I'll just sort of reiterate what we're here to do. Really, we're discussing the whole decarbonization strategies, and of course, transitioning into the whole concept behind the net zero. And what is all this and how is it meant to make the world a better place? And personally, I thought, he's the right person for this because he obviously is the director of green energy, should I say, for Seplat. And this is Africa's largest economy. And it's interesting and it'll be worthwhile learning what initiatives are being taken to sort of drive this agenda. So this should be a very interesting conversation. I encourage you to ask questions. You may type your questions as we're having our conversation. Occasionally, we may take a break for you to ask the questions directly. But the beauty behind our webinars is these are meant to be very engaging and interactive. So please do not hesitate to raise your hands and ask questions directly to either of us, and we will do our best. One of the only caveats really is we avoid anything political, do not ask any very sensitive questions, so try to sort of respect the panels, should I say, the panelists. And that's really about it. So, yeah, so I think I have highlighted what we're here to do, and then we kick things off. So good morning, everyone. And thank you all so much for making time to join the Oclas webinar. This has been a series of webinars we've been doing over the year. And we're getting to the end of the year, so I'm personally looking forward to a break, if I'm being honest with you. My name is Sheyi Lisk-Carew. I'm the CEO and founder of Oclas Consulting. We are a strategy and transformation consulting company, focusing on energy utilities as our core. We typically go into organizations to help streamline how they function, optimize their operations, and generally add value. But this is not about me, and this is not so much about Oclas, should I say. You can obviously go check out our website for more information, and you should hopefully get whatever you need. So I think the person of the hour right now is Effie. So there's quite a lot to say about Effie. I really do not know where to start, but I would just give some prompts, So Effie is obviously an engineer. He's been doing this for over 29 years with experience in the oil and gas sector. He has had various positions in Shell, including the general manager of deepwater production for Shell Nigeria, vice president of cost leadership and continuous improvement for Royal Dutch Shell as well. He's a member of several professional organizations, including the Society of Petroleum Engineers, the Nigeria Society of Engineers, the Council of Regulation of Engineers in Nigeria, COREN. He's an alumni of IMD Business School in Switzerland, Harvard Business School in Massachusetts, and he is currently the executive director / operations director of Seplat. Now, I think we should all give him a round of applause. I know we're all on mute, so we probably can't do that, but I'm assuming we're all doing this. Again, feel free to use icons. Effie, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on here. The last time we saw each other was in Qatar when we were at the Economic Forum, and that was a very, 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 very impactful session there. You can obviously see how various economies are doing all they can to help promote the economy, what they're doing, how they're trying to drive the global challenges, how they're trying to fix problems, and of course, the sensitivity in our sector, the oil and gas sector, a highly capital-intensive sector, a very, should I say, a sector that is highly frowned upon from a sustainability standpoint. We're obviously trying to get the crude out, but in the process of doing this, there's a lot of implications. We then struggle with the whole concept of, should I say, the distillation where you have to flare, and so many other factors, not to mention the cost implications and the risk factor as well. And it's one of the sectors that makes it very challenging to, adhere to the concept of net zero. How are we going to produce fuel, should I just say, without, in a green manner? Obviously there are many solutions out there, which we'll touch on. We'll look at things from a technology standpoint. We'll look at alternative energy sources. And for me, when I think of Nigeria, a population of over 200 million, how and what sort of strategies are being implemented? Obviously, there's a lot, again, we'll talk about from a governance standpoint. We'll also discuss the technology standpoint, or should I just say the enablers in a nutshell. So Effie, thank you once again. I think, we kicked this off by, discussing, what are the main challenges the energy sector is facing, in transition into net zero, in terms of cost, storage, infrastructure, regulation, and the public acceptance. What's your take on this, and what are the opportunities for the energy sector to decarbonize? So over to you, Effie. Yeah, you don't have to start off by what I just asked.
He's director of a company. I bought something like 1,000 shares in this company called Seplat, and I didn't really know enough about it.
Hello? Yeah, Effie, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, someone said he bought 1,000 shares from Seplat. I just wanted to understand, was that a question I need to address or just checking? I had someone raise, I think it was Leon, right? Hello, Leon?
Hello, Leon. Leon, if you don't mind, we go into Q&A at the very end. If you could just directly send me your question and I'll get back to you. Sorry, apologies about that, Effie. Yes, so.
Okay. I just wanted to know whether it was a complaint or whether it was...
Apologies about that.
Whether he's made money or lost money, I wasn't sure. Whether it's a positive or negative. Anyway, Sheyi, I want to say thank you very much, first and foremost. Thanks, many thanks to yourself and also your organization, the Oclas Consulting. Thanks for the opportunity. We're all learning. I know you mentioned all these, God knows, years of experience and all that. Okay, Leon said he made money. That's what I like that. I like that. Thank you, Leon. Thanks.
Thank you, Leon. That's good.
Yeah. So I'll say first and just to say a big thank you, because we got to keep all this dialogue going. And I know sometimes it does come across that there's a lot of frustration. We're not doing enough to help decarbonize the world. The oil and gas industries are normally not seen in the good books. And also, if you look at what's happening lately with Saudi Arabia cutting off 1 million barrels of oil from the market, and Putin taking out 300,000 barrels of oil from the market, you can see oil price nudging back again towards $100 a barrel. This is not what we like. We do not like almost like a hostage situation. We always talk about energy trilemma, which is about environmental sustainability and affordability and also energy security. So it is a big issue. But let's come back to the point you kicked off this session with, and I just said a big thank you to yourself, and thanks also for everyone who's joined us on this this webinar. So first and foremost, I think your question was around opportunities for us to decarbonize. First and foremost, I think we need to decarbonize. It's an imperative. It's not just an opportunity, because of climate change. We've seen how things have gone really pear-shaped. You look at globally this year, we've seen high temperatures. I mean, I was in the US part of summer, and it's extremely, extremely hot. You have all these very scary sort of trend we're seeing in global temperatures. We also have all these issues around forest fires, like Canada, like Greece. We've seen unusually warm waters around Florida that's caused strengthening of the hurricane Idalia as it approached Florida. So there's a whole lot of very terrible trends we're seeing already, and our industry must decarbonize as quickly as possible. Sometimes I tell people that we've actually lost the credit. We're actually almost in a crisis now, to be honest, if we're to meet the net zero targets and avoid or mitigate as a minimum the catastrophic impact of global warming. But I'm glad you used the word challenges and opportunity, because it's pretty much double-edged sword. Because this is how our industry should see this: first, as an opportunity to do the right thing, cut down emissions wherever we can, but also an opportunity to rethink our businesses, our business model, our strategy. I just came out of a very big C-suite session around sustainability, how we cut down our emissions, and also we're thinking about our business model and looking at how we can drive down carbon intensity. One big part in a very poor part of the world like sub-Saharan Africa, you all know very well, it's over 600 million people don't have access to grid electricity, right? And our mothers and our grandmothers in the villages don't even have access to clean cooking energy. So if you sit in Europe and you look at this sort of problem, it's a completely different context from when you sit in the US, or you sit in Asia or India or Africa, for which, like you mentioned, Nigeria with a 200 million population, there's a bit of a struggle here between environmental issue and the social issue. For government, The first bit is how do you lead people out of poverty? So social F comes a lot ahead of the E in this part of it. And yes, there are monetization opportunities from decarbonization. We're installing compressors across all our fields. It's a big opportunity for a lot of investors, a lot of companies that are manufacturing compressors, and consultants like yourself coming in to help us drive, uptime, operational excellence in all these assets, so we stop flaring. Today, as we speak, 80% of our greenhouse gas comes out of flare, and that's a big challenge. And we are working when it comes to addressing that by making sure all that gas is captured and then monetized. And for us in Seplat, we're very privileged in the sense that we have a huge domestic gas business. So today, Seplat produces about 300 million scf of gas that goes to power over 30% of Nigeria thermal plants when it comes to electricity generation. So that's how we see this sort of the challenge on one side. On the other side, there's a huge opportunity. And Nigeria has been a very strong advocate for, advocating this whole gas as a transitioning fuel. I do believe some of our audience today don't believe gas is green energy. Yes, I do agree. But from a Nigerian context, why gas is so critical is a lot of our energy comes out of either diesel today or very heavy fossil fuel content. But as we displace that with gas, whether it's CNG or LPG or methane, you're actually trying to cut back by 30–40% of the greenhouse gas emission from diesel or fuel. So that's why gas comes in quite strong in terms of one of those strategies. I just pause. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very insightful, actually, Effie. It's impressive to see that this is happening. And a lot of times, obviously myself, currently based here in the UK, it's very important, the world hear about the steps Africa, should I say, is taking towards combating this global challenge. To put things in perspective, so I'm obviously here in the UK, and there's a constant push to be a lot more sustainable, but the financial implication is pretty significant. So, just in terms of some context, the UK, I think it was last year, generated roughly around slightly over 200 billion pounds from income tax. Now, from this amount, in order for the UK to meet the target of net zero, as they plan to do by the year 2030, they need to invest 90 billion, which is a substantial amount. So what that means is more than half of the income generated needs to be sort of fed back into this agenda. Now, are they necessarily doing this? Now, the reason I say this is because this is a very huge challenge globally, and a lot has to be done. Unlike other challenges where it's a one man fixes this type thing, in this case, we all have to work together. As individuals, we have certain steps we need to take. As companies, we have things to do. But at the same time, as a government, we have things to do, which I think leads me into what we're going to discuss next. Obviously, you have various policies that govern, operations, govern sustainability. It's very interesting how other companies or countries rather are doing this. And it's quite unique in the context of Nigeria. So if I just throw in the next question here, Effie, what are you noticing when it comes to the latest trends of decarbonization? What's trending out there? What's the trend? And particularly in the Nigerian context.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Sheyi. So there's a whole lot happening, and I'll just hit on the key themes. Number one is we see rapid growth of renewable energy sources. So I flew between not just, I agree it's within Nigerian context, but let me start with what I saw in the UK when I flew from London to Aberdeen.
Yes.
I saw massive wind farms, which I haven't seen for a long time. When you fly between London and Aberdeen, just looking outside the window of the plane, which is quite impressive. Similarly for Nigeria, we started driving renewable energy investment. The problem we still have, even in our companies, with oil and gas kind of background, the kind of return on investment we're getting, we're not seeing that yet in the renewable energy space. And that's why you see things haven't really grown as we expect. But clearly, from our context, there's massive investment in solar energy. It's quite really large in the north, and also even in the down south, like in Lagos, where I'm based. And then if you look at solar and wind power, they're becoming very, very affordable. A lot of countries have taken different approach. so the UK or Europe, a lot of subsidies earlier on. And then if you look at Joe Biden, he signed this Inflation Reduction Act, where there was about $62 billion investment in clean energy. So renewable energy is a big one big part. And if you look at it in 2022, it actually accounts for 28% of global electricity generation. And this is going to grow as the technology grows over time. The other one is electric vehicles becoming quite strong. You see, transportation is being electrified with the use of EV. I know you guys in the UK, Rishi Sunak seems to have pulled back a little bit on banning, but let's
yes, that's true, which is very frustrating. But
I don't want to be political here. But globally, we see EV sales has reached 6.8 million cars last year, and this is expected to grow to 28 million by 2030. Carbon capture and storage is another big part, which we'll see as a big technology of how this is changing. It's becoming quite strong. I worked on carbon capture like 20 years ago. The problem with carbon capture is how you make it bankable and viable, because all you're doing is capturing CO2 and then inject it in the storage on the ground. So how you make that economically viable has been one of the challenges in the past. So, but there's a lot of progress there in terms of the technology, in terms of the approach, and we see that a lot of CCS projects now taking FID across the world. Energy efficiency and sustainable building practices is becoming quite common, especially in Europe, where they advance in building materials, adopting new technology, new construction practices, better insulation, and smart technologies becoming quite prominent in a lot of building design. Circular economy and sustainable supply chains. Companies are beginning to spend a lot of time looking at the supply chain end to end, how they're conserving a material. Carbon pricing and policy initiatives. Governments are now over the world implementing all kinds of carbon pricing mechanism and policies to incentivize emission reduction. Private sectors also, there's been lots of commitment. You've had commitments on 2030 and 2050. Nigeria is committed to 2060 and net zero. By the way, we're working on a 2050 net zero emission, but we strongly believe with the sort of investment we're making, we should be net zero emissions somewhere around 2030. There's a whole lot of global collaboration and climate initiatives also going around the world, with UNFCCC fostering global effort. Like you rightly mentioned, you would need collaboration effort to hit the sort of ambition that's been set for us. And there's a whole lot of public awareness and climate activism. I see lots of younger people becoming quite vocal in terms of driving, making demand for decarbonization. And I think that's why none of my kids want to work in the oil and gas industry, unfortunately. Yeah. It's quite a very, very busy space, Sheyi. I'll just pause.
Yeah. No, Effie, thanks again. And again, this is very, very informative. And, I'm really happy with the wealth of knowledge you're sharing and how, the country and Seplat as well is looking to address these things, For some context as well, the United States, has obviously pledged to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. Europe, the European Union has pledged to achieve net zero by the year 2050, which is quite interesting because it used to be 2030 once upon a time. China has announced plans to reach the peak of carbon emissions by 2030 and achieve be carbon neutral by 2060. India has set a target of achieving 40% of this electricity 40% of its electricity from renewable energy by 2030. And many countries, obviously like Nigeria, are investing in new technologies to decarbonize their economies. You've touched on various alternative energy sources, wind farms, solar, hydro, and of course, gas as well. And I think without any doubt, it's pretty obvious Nigeria is strategically placed when it comes to those alternative avenues. We have fantastic wind, we have good sunlight, and in certain areas, because my understanding is the temperature could be quite overwhelming, but we have areas where putting solar panels, really do work, like in the creeks and so many other places. Obviously, we have a lot of hydro and power, water power, energy generation. And of course, gas, like you said, we have so much gas, 300 million worth of gas, that is accessible to us. And for, this whole concept of sustainable energy generation, now, so for me, what would you say are, based on all of this and, all these countries doing what they're doing, what would you say are some of the most successful carbonization strategies, perhaps, that are worth sort of, that might have been implemented globally, that you think are worth a few of us to learn from, perhaps?
So this one is a very interesting part in terms of strategies. So what we see play out is, for fossil-based economy, where countries are still heavily dependent on fossil fuel, which is a bit counterintuitive if you think about it. The first part is to accelerate monetization of that fossil fuel. That's most countries are trying to double down in terms of pace of investment in oil, because you still need the revenue coming out of the oil part of the portfolio to finance every other investment in clean energy.
That is very true.
So that first is a very high level overarching strategy. And you can see, for us, we changed our strategy a couple of years ago, where we now have 3 pillars. The pillar 1 is around upstream investment. So keep getting into oil investment, buying new assets, accelerating development of the oil side, because as well, bulk 80% of our revenue comes out of oil. And then you have the second pillar, which is the midstream gas business. So that strategy is pretty much how to really double investment in the midstream gas, gas to power, gas to chemical, gas to all sorts, as part of that decarbonization strategy. And then the last part of the cash then goes into this very low ROI portfolio, which is the future. So whether you're looking at solar, or you're looking at wind, or you're looking at all kinds of renewable energy sources, that's the very first high level a strategy, I must say. And that's what you see, which is what Africa has been advocating, this whole concept of, you guys have used fossil fuel to industrialize your economy, and therefore it's only fair that you also allow Africa to also leverage on its resources. The only dilemma there is, somehow, which is a bit also counterintuitive, a lot of countries in Africa don't actually have money. They still have to go to the Western world to raise finance. So you're almost like in a cul-de-sac sort of situation, right? And that's where the ESG then comes in. So that first part is really decarbonizing the upstream business. For us, part of what I mentioned is stopping flaring, installing compressors, we're monetizing all that gas, so we drive down overall carbon intensity of the upstream business. The second one is shifting to renewable energy sources. This is one of the most important decarbonization strategies. So we are looking at investment in power, using gas to replace all the old power plants or coal plants, and therefore you see solar and wind becoming a big part of that strategy. The third part is about, I talked about electrifying our transportation, heating, and industrial processes, because that's part of where you see a lot of emissions come, like in cement factories, even in big gas plant or flow stations. We're replacing our electric pumps by electric-driven pumps, as against using diesel-fired pumps. So very small things in there, heat pump, electric vehicles, technology are becoming very strong and also becoming quite affordable. And then the CCS part is pretty much a lot of work going on for Nigeria. For example, IFC is funding a pilot study being done by BCG, Bolton Consulting Group, to look at potential pilot side, where we'll be doing injection of CO2 as part of the getting into that CCS space. There's also a demand side management, which refers to measures that reduce demand for energy. So our behaviors, how we consume energy, how we use energy, is also quite critical. So demand side management, called the DSM, can be achieved through a variety of means, such as energy efficiency programs, time of use, pricing, demand response programs, and all sorts. And the last one we're now looking at is, even when you try to take out the CO2 as much as you can, you also need sequestration from the natural forestry. So reforestation is becoming a big one. We launched a 5 million tree planting program a couple of years ago, and this involves the process of planting trees to replace those that have been cut down. Trees absorb a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere. If you look at the Amazon in South America, or all these very heavy, dense forests around the world, you'll see that there's been a lot of deforestation globally. And that's an area which a lot of companies are looking at now to get a lot of forestation back to help offset emissions. So those are some of the sort of strategies which is being deployed globally.
Wow, Effie, that's I must say this has been extremely informative, and I'm sure the audience will agree with me. I think at this point, Effie, let me just throw it out to the audience. If anyone has any questions or has any comments or remarks they want to make so far. So if any of you have any questions, again, this is meant to be an interactive session. It's not one of those where we do all the talking. So please feel free to ask your questions and we will do our best to get back to you. So I know Bor has a question. So please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Just
Yeah,
let us know
morning.
where you're calling from as well. I think it's always good to know where we have calls from.
Okay. Yeah. Right now, I'm calling from Benin in Nigeria. And
oh, lovely.
It has been, it has been very, very interesting. Listening to my guy there is as scintillating as always. So that's why I'm here to listen to what he has to say. So I have two questions for you, sir. Number one, what is Seplat doing in particular to help to move forward these decarbonization narratives that has become a buzzword? Everybody's trying to jump on the bandwagon, but even people jumping on the bandwagon, I see a lot of motion and no movement. Trust me. So what is Seplat doing along that line? That number two, I want to have your take on financing these renewable energy projects in Africa, particularly in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we are worried about energy access. In Nigeria, for me, if you ask me, I'm just trying to say my own. In Nigeria, we are not really worried about this global warming, climate change, and the rest. We have energy access problem. More than 93 million Nigerians are not even connected to the grid. And the ones that are connected to the grid, they barely have energy. There are some places for 3 months, 2 months, you don't even find power. So we need a lot of investment to finance this energy access, and renewable energy comes to mind, especially the solar power, because you can easily deploy it. So financing energy access is a big thing for me. So what is your take on that, sir? How do we finance this energy access? Let's take Nigeria as a case in point and the whole of Africa in general. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thanks, Prince. Do I take a couple of more questions and take them in batches, or Sheyi, how do you want to run this?
I think it might be easier. Let's just take another question just in case it's similar. Yeah, if that's okay with you, Effie. Yeah, thank you. Ebi Ijoma has another question. Ebi, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself and ask the question. And thanks for your question on Abo. Good question.
Hello, this is Abera. I tuned in from the United States. I just want to ask, the difference between carbon financing and climate financing. I don't know if I'm digressing from the original topic, but I want to know what is Seplat investing in any of this? I know carbon financing, climate financing in Africa, in Nigeria. Then, secondly, I also want to know, because when we talk about the sustainability, decarbonization, renewable energy, are we trickling this down to the villages, the rural areas where most of the energy is derived from biofuels, that is burning of firewood, causing respiratory issues for a lot of the women in the rural areas. I know they don't have access to grid electricity, but so they use a lot of wood to provide energy for cooking. So how are policies going to be affecting those people who have low access to electricity and who have to depend on depend on wood for their energy? So those two questions. Thank you.
Very good question. Ebi, could you just clarify? Your first question was, what's the difference between carbon financing and what?
Carbon financing and climate finance. How is Seplat invested in any of these two?
Okay. So do I go ahead and just take them one by one?
Yeah, I think we could. Yeah. If you have any more questions, just type it in the chat section, or perhaps we wait till the end of the session. But thank you very much for the very good question so far.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. I'll start with Prince. So thanks, Prince. I'm glad to have you on board. I know you're around. It's always good to have Nigerians abroad, try to speak interest in what's happening in our country. So I'd like to thank you all for joining this webinar. So the first question, what's Seplat doing? I tried to describe what we're doing as I ran through the questions, but maybe I wasn't very clear. So the first thing Seplat is doing is first, in terms of decarbonization, is to stop flaring. Today, we'll flare roughly around 40 million scoff of gas per day. And we started installing compressors across all our facilities. So we'll then capture that AG, mostly from AG, associated gas, and then put it into our gas sales line, because we have a big gas business both in the east and in the west. In the west, we have a very massive gas plant in Oben, and where we do about 300 million scoff of gas into the Alps that goes to supply gas to Geregu, Azura, and all this very big power company. The Alps also takes gas to the Dangote fertilizer plant in Lagos. So that's the very first part of how we're decarbonizing our operation. And I did mention that 80% of our greenhouse gas emission today comes out of flared gas. And that's the thing you see across the country, that the bulk of the greenhouse gas comes out of flaring for oil and gas. If you go to cement industry, it's a different kind of ball game. But overall, that's the first part. And the second part is now also stopping all the fugitive emission. So there's no leaks, we're stopping all that. And then vent gas from such vessel and tanks and all that, that's also being compressed. Because the problem is you have to install multiple compression stages from atmospheric all the way to about export gas sales line pressure is about 80 bar into the Alps. So that's the series of investment, and it's massive investment, I must say. So that's the first part, how we're decarbonizing. And then the other part now is we're looking at investment in gas to power projects. So we are working with a number of power companies. I don't want to reveal because it's still coded projects, because it's never been done before. We're pretty much a gas producer, an oil producer. But now, if you follow our trend very well, we will, by end of the year, make a major final investment decision on going to the power business. And I see Seplat within the next, before the end of the decade, we could potentially become a 1 gigawatt energy company. So electric generation, remember, we're very strong in gas. So we're using gas now to go into power investment. So when we do that, what you're then doing is you're now displacing all these diesel-fired generators that are all over the country. Because the problem you have today is there's not enough generation. There's an issue with transmission. There's also an issue with distribution. But the new electricity bill allows people to now, states can now generate, transmit, distribute electricity wherever you are. So we're now going to captive market, embedded market, sub-franchise model. And that's where you're decarbonizing the country at a country scale, because you're now shutting off a lot of a diesel-powered system by gas-powered system. And the third pocket what Seplat is doing now to invest in renewable energy. We're looking at solar, we're looking at wind, and there's a whole lot of business development studies going on now. We've looked at some investment already on ground. You must have heard Shell bought Destar, which is one of the biggest solar investment for Shell in Nigeria. In the similar way, we're also looking at small solar companies to see how we can help take equity and then bring in our financial muscle and then scale up investment. That way you start growing the solar business. The problem with solar today is highly fragmented, and a lot of it is off-grid. Solar doesn't work when you go to the grid because of the problem with the mess we have in our transmission system. And for business like us, we cannot go into very small, rooftop solar for offices or banks. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at really mega scale solar power investment. The countries where solar has worked very well in Africa are countries where the grid works. You look at countries like Egypt, you see massive solar farm of 500 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts. So it does work very well. You have a grid that works. The problem is our transmission grid isn't working. And I know the last president started working with Siemens to try and bring that transmission system into modern specification. So that is going to come, but it's down the line. Now, your second question is about financing renewable energy in Africa. I think, Prince, this is the biggest issue. It's very tough. When I go talk to investors in London and New York, everybody wants double-digit investment, return on investment. That's the biggest issue. So when I sit in meetings, I tell people, how many of you in this call will be ready to invest and you don't get any return in the next 5 years? And the answer is always no, because people are selfish. People want to have return on investment that's quite attractive. So that is where the biggest issue is, Prince, because these returns are not that attractive now. But I always tell them, as the technology changes, this is where the money is going to be made in the next 5-10 years. So for us, it's about stepping into, put our shoes into the doors, positioning ourselves for that future when this investment becomes quite viable. If I go to Eberi's question, the difference between carbon finance and climate financing, we don't finance. We're not a financing company. We're an energy company. So we raise finance to invest into our various portfolios. And whether the portfolio is upstream or midstream gas or renewable energy or new energy, we raise finance through debt, equity, or bonds, and there are also all kinds of green bonds out there in the world where you can actually tap on. Then the last one about rural area, you're right, the unserved or underserved, like bankers will use, my grandmoms and the grannies who have in our villages, it's still a big problem because there's no grid connection to deliver energy to them. So what a lot of companies are doing now, we're looking at LPG. So we're now bolting LPG into our gas plants, because with LPG, you can bottle LPG and then deliver that LPG bottle to the most rural community. And that way you're beginning to bring them into that gas value chain. There's also lots of investment in compressed natural gas, CNG, because you need all these means of transporting energy where you don't have pipeline infrastructure getting to, just like you don't have transmission grid getting to the villages. So those are news investment we see here that's playing out and it's helping to really, really deliver energy into all this underserved community. It's going to take time. It's not going to happen just today, but a lot of companies, that's what they're working on. If you go look at the Nigerian energy transition plan that was announced last year by the former Vice President, Osibajo, a lot of all this is put in there, and the country needs about $1.9 trillion to deliver on this energy access thing. So it's a big challenge.
It's a huge challenge.
Big challenge. If you layer the current situation of the country where, with sabotage and all that, production is gone down, you can see the whole forex volatility, you can see that Nigeria actually needs a lot of money to deliver on some of the issues we're discussing here today. I'll just pause there. I hope I've answered Prince and Ebby's question.
Thank you very much. Doreen, I see you have a question, but just bear with us because I'm worried we're pressed for time. So we will come back to questions in literally 5 to 10 minutes, and we take questions before we end the session. So Doreen, please apologies.
That's fine.
Emeka, I see you also have a question. Please bear with us. This is such a very informative session. Effie, thank you once again. And for me, it's all about the learning and the visibility of what is happening and how significant, a company like Seplat is on that journey to sustainability. And these are things the global market should not take for granted. I'm just adding on to what Ebby asked, so the whole concept behind carbon financing and climate, there are terms that are typically used interchangeably, but, from a carbon financing perspective, it is what's used to reduce, is the financing mechanism more or less used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This could include things like carbon taxes, emission trading schemes, and maybe carbon offsetting perhaps. And then when you look at climate finance, it's a broader term that refers to the financial mechanism that is used typically around addressing the climate change itself. This could include things like carbon financing as well as other mechanisms such as grants, loans, and investments. So I just thought I should throw that out there for you, Ebby, to sort of differentiate what those two terms really stand for. We're literally getting to the end of the session. We still have a lot to cover, but I would have to sort of prioritize the next sort of trigger questions because obviously Effie is very busy and we need to sort of respect his time as well. So Effie, obviously it's been very informative, and like I said, the audience do agree, bringing it home, what are the lessons that can be learned from these strategies and what plan does Nigeria as a continent have? I'm indirectly saying, are we getting the right level of support we need from a regulatory perspective? Is that an incentive or is there room for improvement, from the government, should we say?
I think the way I look at it, Nigeria is not short of policies. We're not short of, we're in fact over-regulated, in my view. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem we have is execution. And that's the problem. That's the problem with when you have democracy, especially democracy that's a lot of people centered and not ideology driven. So what I'm trying to say is you still know we're still evolving as a people. If you're in the UK like yourself, you're either in the conservative right or Labour right. So whether is A or B tomorrow, those ideologies drive the how the country is developing. Whereas here, every 4 years, there's a big change in government. Someone else comes, the new sheriff on the block. There's no, even within the same party. So, but again, you said that this is not about politics, but lessons learned. I think for me, if I reflect, is Nigeria still has a lot of oil and gas in the ground. The above ground rate is a big issue. So for us, that first thing is around how they decarbonize and try to get this oil and gas out of the ground, to improve prosperity and lift people out of poverty, which is my earlier point earlier on. We're not in the space of Europe or America, let's be clear. This is still a very poor country. You talked about 200 million people today. Nigeria is projected to become the biggest nation after India and China by 2050. We will be 500 million people, and that's a projection. So you just imagine what 500 million people by 2050, what it means in terms of demand for energy, in terms of people moving to the middle class. There's a whole lot of infrastructure challenges. It's quite massive. So the other thing is about how do we diversify our energy sources, which is critical. The VP launched an energy transition plan, and solar is pretty much picking up very fast. There's been a lot of feasibility around wind energy. I've seen that. And also even hydro, to double down in terms of hydro investment in hydro energy. Policy and regulatory framework is another big part. I would say a lot of the policies are in place. Some are still being developed, but we're not really short of policies. What we do lack is just execution. It's also tied to clear leadership with visionary leadership who can have a team to deliver. And the last one is around education and awareness, raising public awareness, educating the population around benefits and challenges of decarbonization. Ebby talked about, biomass is still a big part in the villages. There's a whole big change happening in some of the areas we operate by. We're taking LPG, and people are still a bit reluctant. They're scared of LPG, high pressure in this small bottle system, safety issues around. So it's going to take a lot of time how you educate and drive the awareness and manage what you guys probably call management of change as you without psychological barrier. So those are things we're working on in terms of what I see as lessons learned from the strategies and how Nigeria is actually moving in that direction.
That's interesting. Very, very true, actually, Effie. And then in the context of the role of technology in decarbonization, how do you see technologies, should we say, being a little bit more affordable and accessible? And finally, what are some of the key technologies that may be used with the decarbonization, in the energy sector?
So there's a lot of change happening in technology space. I must say this is where I think, if I think about it, gives me a lot of excitement that this is where the disruption will come from. If you look at solar today, you can see what the Chinese are doing. It's changing rapidly. And without that technology, you really cannot disrupt that affordability variable, because the biggest issue is about affordability. People can't afford energy. No matter what you do, people will still go back to fossil fuel. So technology has a big role to play in terms of looking at new design, new emissions. Even in the turbo machinery space, we do have turbines now that can run on gas and run on hydrogen. There's a project I'm working on now in terms of a plan where we see big companies like Baker Hughes are now developing turbines which are run on hydrogen. So technology for me is the game changer. Technology is what's going to disrupt. If you look at, I always use the Elon Musk example that when Tesla came onto the market, all the Toyotas and all the BMW and all that were still sitting behind. And today you can see they're playing catch up. And you can see how that has pretty much disrupted the EV space. In terms of affordability, that's the challenge. I did talk about solar panels. If you generate power from solar today, it's still very much expensive compared to grid power. And that's where the challenge is. But I think with technology, innovation, R&D, investment in R&D, and a lot of startup, which I like what the US is doing. So what Joe Biden did with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is okay. There's no point just driving policies and framework with all your politicians and legislation, but let me also put a cash on the table. And you can see even companies now in the UK and Europe are looking at moving to the US. There's one big issue. I don't know whether you guys have noticed the trend now that market capitalization for companies in America seem to, outperform companies in Europe, and Europe feels they're sort of behind. So that's where I see a lot of changes will come in, how government drives policy, drives incentive, so that at some point, all these businesses become standing business on their own, viable and sustainable business on their own. But at the initial part of it, you need a lot of incentive, R&D, a lot of tax breaks. There's so many financial incentive that will help drive a lot of startups who will come in and really disrupt and transform this energy quagmire. Hello? Hello, Sheyi.
This is very true, very true. And this is extremely insightful. Hello?
Your network. I don't know if I network.
Someone else in the background. I'm not sure if
your network is sort of.
No, sorry, I thought I had someone. Oh yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, maybe I don't know whether it's my side.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear, but it's sort of.
Class, your network is breaking.
Okay. Oh, that's very strange. Okay. Apologies, just bear with me. We've never had this challenge before. I'd like to think I'm in the UK, and the internet is really messing up. I do apologize. Can you hear me now?
Sometimes the latency of the internet can be that bad. So not every internet is that.
Oklas, I still have to ask a small question just before we end, please. Why your network is still breaking?
This is true, America. Yeah. Sorry, we'll get to the question. Just give me another 2 more minutes. We're literally coming to the end of the session. Effie, just on that note, just a quick one around how can we perhaps measure progress and track progress towards net zero? Are there any ideas you have around this?
Okay, so in terms of, I think your network is bad, but if I hear you clearly, how can we measure?
Can you all hear me?
It's still patchy, but I can pick out what you're saying. You're asking, how can we measure and track progress towards net zero?
Yes, correct.
So it's the same sort of framework everybody's using. Establish clear emission reduction target, and that's what we've done. Countries have done that, companies are doing that. And if you're a publicly listed company like us, we're listed in London, there's a huge demand from our investment community. Every time we go out for market calls, capital market, they want to see even our quarterly reporting, the tracking how we're driving that target we set. So to measure and track progress toward net zero in oil and gas production sector, it is essential that companies set specific and ambitious emission reduction target. And this target should be aligned with international climate goals, such as limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's the first one. Second one, monitor your greenhouse gas emissions. So we've taken a baseline of our greenhouse gas emissions across all our facilities, and therefore all the investment we're making now to drive that, we're tracking it and making adjustment to our strategy. Even my scorecard, a big part of my scorecard today carries a huge element on the ESG. Almost 30% of my pay is tied to our ESG performance at the C-suite level. Now, adopt transparent reporting standards. I know that there's another challenge. There's so many standards. There's TCFD, there's GRI, there's FASB, there's all kinds of standards now globally. But work with a lot of consulting companies to help us shape which of the standards to use. And it's evolving at a very, very fast pace. But companies should follow recognized reporting framework, such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, to ensure consistency and compatibility of data. And all these are auditable as well. Third-party auditors coming in to audit, so we're not just playing with numbers or books. And final one is to set interim milestones. So breaking that long-term net zero goal. So people say 2060 or 2050. So obviously we'll all be dead by then anyway. So it's around how do you actually track now? So it's not just waiting till 2050 or 2060, but how do you break that down into very short-term goals and begin to measure, track, reward, recognize, and also double down on your strategy, because strategy is what drives what you do in companies. So regularly assessing progress against this milestone will also ensure that you can then make adjustments as needed. So that's how we can measure and track progress towards net zero.
online now. I don't know what happened there, but I do apologize. Very, very informative. So we're pressed for time now, so we'll just go into the questions, if that's okay with you, Effie. Doyin, you had a question, so if you don't mind asking us your question, and then after you, we'll go over to Emeka, who asked the question in the chat section, and then Effie, we would answer your question, and if any other person has any other question, you would go after Effie. So over to you, Doyin.
Thank you, Sheyi. Thanks a lot, Effiong, for the presentation. Very good and very detailed. Now, I work in a consultancy. Primarily in the UK. I do quite a lot of work in Europe, and we're starting to sort of build some sort of inroads into sub-Saharan markets. One of the key works that we did recently was the ESG strategy for one of the large, oil and gas company out there, ESG and the sustainability strategy. So that's something that I actually did for them as an external consultant. And yeah, it was great to do that. But and then also one of those companies I actually wrote their strategies and their sustainability report. They also asked me to look at the energy transition plan. That obviously ties in with the national government's priorities. The government's priority obviously is to be net zero or fully transit by 2060. Now, whether that's achievable or not, that's another question. I think is ambitious. But what is the role of a big a giant like Seplat? What sort of role are you guys playing to help the government to transit quickly? Obviously, a lot of our revenue come from oil and gas. So there's obviously that sort of, natural tendency to want to focus on that and start to drive that, around that. But how are you supporting the national government? Just as I've done in the UK, I've done some work with the government as well. And some of the things that we've done for them is to help them from a private sector perspective, get everyone on board. It's a collaborative effort, right? I want to try to see some sort of transparency around what the large oil and gas companies are doing to help the national government meet its targets of net zero, energy transition and whatnot, and then also to deepen the adoption of clean energy within in all parts of the country. Basically, I think that's the question I have. So I just wanted to hear from you to see what role are you guys playing and how significant is that going to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I take one or two more and then before I go on to the answer, or Sheyi?
Yeah, I think let's just take one or two more in case there's a consistent theme. Emeka, do you want to ask your question, or would you rather I read it out?
Okay, so thanks, Sheyi. Thanks, Effie. Quite elaborate, and I like the fact that Seplat is doing a lot to, having created a new energy division. It means a lot for the oil and gas or energy industry. So as you said earlier, some companies are already looking at other sorts of alternative energy, such as hydrogen, blue hydrogen, blue ammonia. And I was wondering, is this something you guys are looking at in terms of possible alternatives? And apparently some of these elements, like some of these new hydrogen, can also be a byproduct of the oil and gas industry. So how are you guys looking at, creating a new stream of energy source, especially with blue hydrogen and blue ammonia? That's the question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Emeka. Abby?
Okay, let me go straight to the point. So we've been talking about, net zero transition, and from my understanding, I think it was Osinbajo, the former vice president, that declared the decade of gas, because gas would play a major role in the transition with regards to Nigeria. And I'm happy to hear that Seplat is investing in the gas to power. But I want us to bring this home a bit. We're investing in gas to power. We understand that so far we have already 13 gigawatt installed capacity, so most of which is stranded. I think I'll be 13.8 now with Zongero coming in. And we have highest that distribution companies can, boast of about 4.5 operational capacity, transmission about 5.8, highest has been done so far in the history of Nigeria. So I'm wondering, and still we have infrastructure challenges with regards to gas transmission in Nigeria. So I'm saying this because I'm part of the transaction advisory team that worked on the NNPC 1350 megawatt Abuja gas power plant. the Kano, and there's a big issue of how this power will be off-taken with embeds issues, payment issues, challenges in the market, liquidity issues in the market. So I'm wondering, what are you going to do about the risks involved in offtake, payments, the whole ATC and C losses, recovery of your investment? I'm speaking to Seplat this time around. Are we going to be hosting another elephant project, or just, down the value chain from production to transmission to distribution? What is Seplat's plan? Wouldn't it be better to actually channel the funds to distribution, infrastructure, or to enabling or strengthening the transmission? I'm wondering, how are we going to offtake or, transmit this power, 1 gigawatt you're talking about? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ebby. Good question as well. Okay, so Effie, I think we'll pause on the questions now because we've literally gone past the hour. So I'm over to you, Effie, and we will end on your final, your final answer, more or less.
Okay, all right, let me run through. I know we're running a bit late, but I don't mind giving you guys about 5-10 minutes more. But
thank you very much. Really kind. No, thank you, Effie.
People are busy. So let me complete. So doing you're right in the sense that, if I look back on my career, the last 5 years has been very heavy with a lot of work on ESG, with strategy, and we've brought in a lot of consultants, Buchanan, a lot of companies are working that. But the problem with government is still a bit slow. So what we've done is to use all the outcome of our work with the consultants to engage government. And now you can see even a company like NNPC for the first time now started working. They just set up a sustainability team and now bringing ESG into the business. So it's very early stage, but that's how we're trying to influence. And I'm also a bit conscious when you say big, the truth is we're not a big, we're just a small independent company that's trying to do things right. And because we're listed, we're probably a lot more visible than a non-listed company. But in terms of production size, there are a lot of other companies that are bigger than Seplat. The only difference is they're probably not listed in jurisdiction like LSE, London Stock Exchange, where the compliance requirement is quite strict. So we're a lot visible because of that public listing, and we'll have to do all kinds of disclosure. But there are other bigger companies in Nigeria than Seplat. I just want to set that. So, but all you can do in Nigeria is a bit, do work, then try to influence. Because don't forget that politicians are extremely sensitive people with a lot of ego and pride and all that. So we're careful how we manage that space. So that's what we're doing. For the green hydrogen, it's also part of our portfolio, but we see hydrogen as coming more down the food chain, much down, based on the work we've done with companies like McKinsey, Woodmark. The way they prioritize renewable energy in Nigeria is solar first, and that's what we're tagging on that sort of investment train. The next then becomes the wind, and then hydrogen then comes in at the back end of that. That's how we're working that space. And our investment in mobile precision Nigeria, the assets we're through. Hopefully we'll get a transaction closed. It's got about 12 TCF of gas. And part of our strategy for ammonia is to use that gas to drive that business. And on FB point, you're spot on. I'm also on the steering committee as a sponsor for the Decade of Gas. The point you raise is a very complex one around power, with all the infrastructure issues, ATC and C, all that. But the way the approach we're taking is we're not going to the grid. So we're doing what you call captive power investment, so which means you look at an area, you stay off the transmission, you capture the market. It could be a sub-franchise, like in Lagos, EcoDisco is a distribution company, but they cannot meet, they have over a gigawatt deficit in terms of demand versus what comes from the grid. So we're coming in now and plugging a 235 megawatts power in to fill that vacuum. So that way, I'm not going to the grid, I'm not just all over the place, I'm very selective in a segment of the market that I know there's quite liquid. The premium customers, whether you're looking at industrial, commercial, or residential customers in the Lagos Agris, and as a pilot we're trying, is a first foray into this, is almost $400 million investment, and then we're taking it step by step. If it works, fine, but I do agree with you that there's a bit of risk in there. But the government is also trying its best, like, for example, building more pipeline infrastructure to distribute gas more widely so all these thermal plants can get gas. The new law now, like I said, allows every state to take its own destiny into its hand, so you can actually generate, transmit, and distribute within a mini grid area. So you don't have to go to NEC and all these big things that are big problems. So we think it's possible, and we think it's the future. Nigeria cannot afford to remain in darkness as the energy poverty capital for forever. And we believe we're going to take a stake in the ground. It's going to involve taking some bit of risk, like every investment you go through, if you want to make an impact. And we're positive that this is the right thing to do. So we're not going through that 13 megawatts, NIPP all over the place, or going through transmission. No, we're targeting a sub-franchise population space that's premium, that can pay, and where ATC and C are less than 10%. Those are my comments, Ebby.
Wow, Effie, thank you so much. I'm guessing no more questions, and I hope all your questions have been answered. If no one says anything, I'll take that as a yes, we're satisfied. Well, Effie, I just want to thank you one more time. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. I have definitely been, I've learned a lot, and I'm really looking forward to, seeing what Seplat is doing out there, and I'm really impressed. And I'll be using this as a case study reference point on what we're looking to do, in the context of Nigeria as well. So Effie, thank you so much. To all of you on the call, I want to thank you all very, very much. I would share Effie's LinkedIn page on here. Please connect with him. At Oclas, we encourage direct communication as well. The reason being, it's always good to hear from the horse's mouth, and of course to learn from the experts within the industry. So Effie, thank you again. And all of you that joined this meeting, thank you very much. And we look forward to, Effie, we'll see you soon. Yeah, and we look forward to the next webinar. So all that information will be online. So thank you all very much, and take care. God bless everyone. Bye-bye. Yep.